U.S. railroads are poised to stop shipments of farm products and other key goods starting tomorrow as the industry braces for a possible labor strike that could cost the world's biggest economy more than $2 billion a day. And this comes after Norfolk Southern has already shut down railway freight ahead of what seems to be an almost certain railroad worker and railway union strike and shutdown. Norfolk Southern Corp said it plans to halt unit train shipments of bulk commodities ahead of a potential U.S. rail worker strike. The railroad also said it would stop accepting autos for transit at its facilities starting this afternoon. And we have to expect that other railways are likely to follow suit. And these railroad shutdowns are going to affect more than just autos for transit. With statements like these from Max Fisher, chief economist at the National Grain and Feed Association, which represents most U.S. grain handlers, said, "We are hearing several rail carriers are tentatively planning to wind down shipments." Now, a halt to shipments of grains, fertilizer, fuel, and other crucial items threatens to hobble the U.S. economy at a time of rampant inflation and fear of a prolonged global economic slump. The timing is impeccable after just receiving the latest August CPI inflation reports from the Fed, with interest rates expected to go up again a week from now. We must not ignore the huge threat to food supply chains that are especially at risk as farmers are gearing up for harvest and need to get their supplies to customers. Crops are especially in high demand due to shortages further instigated by the war in Ukraine and weather woes across the globe. So we have to ask ourselves, is this really about the workers in the unions, or is this a part of a much bigger picture? Now, I'm going to share with you a message from someone who commented on a recent video that PFS on YT posted on her channel that may help better explain what all could possibly be going on here. That the current administration, the Fed, Congress, nor any other branch of government will dare share with the American people. But I hope this doesn't end up getting my channel deleted, but here goes anyway. Fun facts. Kevin may like to know about this. Guess which railroad hauls fuel to both Flying J and Love's truck stops and travel centers distributors? Union Pacific. Now guess which railroad has told Love's and Flying J truck stops that they would be reducing said fuel deliveries by 50%. Yep, Union Pacific. Okay, now for the bonus round. You ready? Okay, squirrel, here you go. And if you guys haven't watched PFS on YT, go check her out. You'll understand this whole squirrel mess. Guess which railroad is owned and operated by a green energy-based investment firm called BlackRock? Bingo. Okay, great job, squirrel. The squirrel thing cracks me up. Okay, the $1,000,000 question. BlackRock Investments Company also happens to own a manufacturing company and asks the question, what do they manufacture? Electric semi-trucks. Yep. That's right. They're building and selling electric tractor trailers and other commercial duty trucks. So the same company that cut back diesel fuel deliveries to Love's and Flying J is the same company that builds and sells electric trucks. Now you can go on Google or YouTube for more on this to get additional information. Now they are a huge reason fuel prices and diesel shortages happened. So that leads me to believe so much for the increased demand for trucking and truck drivers to pick up the slack of the stalled railroad freight. But what does this all actually mean? And why would they want to cripple our economy, hurt the American people, further reduce our ability to improve our food supply, make it nearly impossible to earn a living, while only trying to promote their own electric semi-truck company agenda? Well, we'll get to that soon. But in the meantime, I looked it up, and sure enough, this is what I found. Daimler Truck North America, BlackRock Renewable Power, and NextEra Energy Resources plan a $650 million joint venture to build charging infrastructure for electric and hydrogen fuel cell medium and heavy-duty trucks, addressing a barrier to widespread adoption. The new charging stations and hydro-filling outlets are intended for commercial trucking, which is underserved in a transition to renewable energy that has seen public charging focused on cars and light trucks that require less energy and time to recharge. The first phase of construction is expected to begin in 2023 on a network of charging sites on critical freight routes along the east and west coasts in Texas by 2026. The plan is to leverage existing infrastructure and amenities while adding greenfield sites. Daimler and its main rivals Volvo and Traton are spending $593 million to install and operate 1,700 charging stations for commercial trucks in Europe by 2027. BlackRock's Renewable Power Group invests across the spectrum of renewable power and energy transition, supporting infrastructure globally, with more than $9.5 billion in more than 350 wind and solar projects, as well as electric vehicle charging infrastructure and battery energy storage systems across 15 countries on 5 continents. NextEra Energy Resources is the world's largest generator of renewable energy from the wind and sun. NextEra would contribute its EIQ mobility software platform that quantifies the value and timing of fleet conversions, and its decarbonization as a service platform that helps fleets transition to zero-emission electric and hydrogen vehicles. But the key here is they're addressing a barrier to widespread adoption. And what better way to gain acceptance? Force it on everyone. What we relied on in the past, being railway freight and diesel-powered tractor trailers, are now being shut down, priced out, and less desirable by showing their flaws and how they have the power to cripple our nation without a viable backup plan: a green, renewable electric semi-truck grid. And the freight railroad union workers' strike and shutdown is going to affect more than just the transportation of commodities and hazardous freight unsafe for U.S. highways. Attorney Tim Anderson shared this information just yesterday. As the pending rail strike looms, Amtrak is suspending services from Chicago to Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Antonio, because the tracks used by Amtrak are almost all owned by private rail operators who will be affected by the pending strike. Norfolk Southern has stopped accepting intermodal transport today as well. And those are the containers used by large retailers and e-commerce brought by ships and trucks. Biden is sitting on his hands, so to speak. What happens if 30% of the way we ship goods in the U.S. goes offline Friday? And that is a damn good question and quite a real possibility. Representatives for BNSF Railway Co. and Union Pacific Corp. also signaled they were prepared to curtail service as the deadline looms. BNSF said in a statement, "We must take actions to prepare for the eventuality of a labor strike if the remaining unions cannot come to an agreement," claiming that the halting of cargoes by some railways is aimed at ensuring crews aren't stranded if a work stoppage occurs Friday morning. And you would think that with November midterm elections less than 2 months away, Democratic President Joe Biden would be personally trying to break the logjam between industry and labor unions. Reports state that the White House has started crafting contingency plans to ensure critical materials can reach consumers in the event of a work stoppage, a sign that negotiations still have a long way to go. And I would be shocked to see the master plan that these geniuses have come up with. But the statement is clear. They are expecting a strike to happen, and they don't know how to stop it. And at the very least, they're trying to pin it on the workers and not the railroad companies as far as who's to blame. Perhaps Biden should write a letter and call these railroad companies and tell them what to do. Just like he tried to do earlier this year, back in June, when Biden told oil companies in a letter well above normal refinery profit margins are not acceptable. But why? Why isn't he doing that now? Perhaps there's more to uncover here behind the true intentions of this shutdown. This may perhaps help further push his agenda, whereas ExxonMobil and Chevron did not want to play ball. Now, this railroad workers union strike is already beginning to wreak havoc on our supply chain and particularly our food supply. We all know that farmers are in desperate need of inputs and supplies, and time is of the essence. If farmers are unable to plant crops for the fall, then we're going to be in a world of hurt in the spring. According to the Association of American Railroads, railways are no longer shipping ammonia, which is an important component of about 3/4 of all fertilizer, because it would be dangerous if the hazardous material was stranded during a potential rail strike. Ammonia is an essential nutrient for plants. A halt to rail shipments of ethanol threatens to reverse the recent slide in U.S. gasoline pump prices as well. So we can all expect to see a return to record highs at the pump. Almost 3/4 of the nation's supply is moved on trains, mostly mostly from Midwest plants where corn is made into the fuel additive for blending into gasoline. And the petrochemical industry may be forced to slow down production at plants that churn out plastics and other products needed in industries across the U.S. if shipments of key hazardous chemicals necessary are delayed for an extended time. And senior petrochemicals analyst at S&P Global Commodity Insights, Robert Steer, said in an email, "These hazardous materials are the first products impacted. These are difficult to ship by any other means than specialized rail cars." So we have the dangers of a buildup of storage of hazardous materials with a railway strike and freight train shutdown. Supposedly, President Joe Biden's administration made a contingency plan that is aiming to ensure deliveries of critical goods in the event of a shutdown of the U.S. rail system, while pressing railroads and unions to reach a deal to avoid a work stoppage affecting freight and passenger service. But as of the time of recording this video, there's been no real notable progress made, and the strike is almost certain. The White House is reported to be urgently discussing contingency plans amid this monumental rail shutdown threat. This is truly history in the making. So the White House is urgently discussing contingency plans as the threat of a rail shutdown looms, with agencies across the federal government working through how they could potentially use federal authority to keep critical supply chains operational as labor talks continue to sit at an impasse. The work has ramped up over the last several days as officials have grown increasingly concerned about a labor strike if freight rail labor negotiations fail to produce an agreement ahead of Friday's deadline. And according to White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, President Joe Biden personally called rail unions and companies on Monday while visiting Boston in an attempt to avert a rail shutdown. While officials have been closely watching the developments and have gotten directly involved in an effort to find a resolution for several weeks, plans have been put into place for accelerated efforts to prepare for a worst-case scenario. The outcome of allowing a railroad worker strike and freight railway shutdown would lead to massive supply chain disruptions and double down on political and economic risks. A White House official said the White House is working with other modes of transportation, including shippers, truckers, air freight, to see how they can step in and keep goods moving in case of a rail shutdown. But to be honest with you, this is not a viable solution to this very, very big problem. The official added that the administration has also been working with relevant agencies to assess what supply chains and commodities are most likely to face severe disruptions, and the emergency authorities available to keep goods moving. Meanwhile, about 60,000 union members who work for the railroad are set to go on strike, including the engineers and conductors who make up the two-person crews on each train. Even though 45,000 other union members belong to unions that have reached tentative deals with the railroads, a strike by engineers and conductors would bring the freight rail system, which carries nearly 30% of the nation's freight, to a grinding halt. They are literally holding all the keys. Stakeholders are already warning that the situation is dire, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce detailed some of the urgent issues in a letter to congressional leadership on Monday. Chamber Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer Neil Bradley said in the letter, a shutdown of the nation's rail service would have enormous national consequences. He continued by saying it would lead to perishable foods such as dairy, fruits, and vegetables spoiling at their points of origin. It would halt Amtrak service for approximately 12.2 million daily riders in 46 states. It would disrupt materials and goods being delivered to factories and ports, and would inhibit the transport of heating fuels and other important fuels and chemicals. These are only a few examples of the damage of a rail shutdown. One area of key concern that we continue to hear mentioned is hazardous materials carried by rail. Now, this is bad. The White House official said we are paying particular attention to hazardous materials carried by rail to protect the safety of workers and communities and to support the continued distribution of vital hazardous materials that depend on rail transport, such as chlorine for water treatment plants. Adding that all tools are on the table and will be deployed as appropriate. But how about the tools to prevent the strike from actually happening? And this is why I don't trust the information that they're providing to us. While concern about a strike has heightened at the White House in recent days, the administration remains hopeful that the matter will be resolved. But that's just what they tell the press, so they don't tip us all off to the mass chaos that is about to be unleashed. And apparently, the president does not have the authority to head off a strike. But Congress can still act to prevent a work stoppage. And now we have the battle of left versus right, as they use this as an opportunity to negotiate amongst themselves for the funding and bill proposals that they want. Yeah, sure. Screw the rest of the American people, as long as you get your palm greased. Okay, got it. The White House official added that, "We hope this planning and preparation will prove unnecessary and that negotiating parties will agree to a resolution and not allow American workers, families, and businesses to be hurt by a rail stoppage. We've been clear in all our communications with the negotiating parties that a shutdown is unacceptable and will hurt American families, workers, and businesses, and they must take action to avert it." Now, this is a clear warning for the working class, middle class, retail employees, warehouse workers, truck drivers, fast food restaurant workers, cleaning crews, construction workers, automotive assembly line technicians, everyone. Please pay attention.